All right, here's a big breaking coming in from Sri Lanka. Ranil Wickremesinghe now the new Sri Lankan president. After much deliberation, it appears Ranil Wickremesinghe becomes the new president of Sri Lanka. He was the same man who acted as the interim president. There was a lot of mistrust owing to the fact that he was a man seen as a Gotabaya loyalist, the Rajapaksa loyalist at least. Ranil Wickremesinghe, after much deliberation, has now been elected as the new Sri Lankan president. Huge development coming in from Sri Lanka after the economic meltdown, never seen before crisis in Sri Lanka. The president, the prime minister had to resign. In fact, literally fled. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, had to flee the country after pressure from its citizens for him to be punished for bringing down Sri Lanka to its knees. Post his exit, Ranil Wickremesinghe was first acting as the interim prime minister, then acted as the interim president. Now, the latest coming in, Ranil Wickremesinghe is the new Sri Lankan president. He's been formally appointed after much deliberation. Today is the day when a decision had to be made. President polls just took place, and here we see Ranil Wickremesinghe has become the new president of Sri Lanka. Huge development here. Sri Lankan crisis. In fact, one must note, Ranil Wickremesinghe has huge responsibility on his shoulders. We're looking at Sri Lanka, looking at a crisis never seen before. At a time like this, Ranil Wickremesinghe now takes over as the new president of the country. Here, Sri Lanka's interim president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, was facing off against Dullas Alaha Perunma, a 63-year-old staunch Sinhala Buddhist nationalist leader, and also key member from the breakaway group of the ruling SLPP party. And after much of that deliberation, it appears Ranil Wickremesinghe has won as the president of Sri Lanka. He wins with 134 votes. Huge development coming in from Sri Lanka. In fact, at this point, Ranil Wickremesinghe already acted as the interim prime minister as well as the interim president. Here we're looking at Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is a Sri Lankan. He was looked at as the Rajapaksa's loyalist. He was a man who acted as the interim president as well. But there was a lot of mistrust owing to the fact that he was quite close to the Rajapaksas. But nonetheless, he's managed to win with 134 votes at this point. He was facing off with Dullas Alaha Perunma, a 63-year-old Sinhala Buddhist nationalist leader, but managed to win with 134 votes above. Gaurav Sawant joining us from Colombo. Gaurav Sawant, huge responsibility for Ranil Wickremesinghe. At this point, he's got to literally pull Sri Lanka back to normalcy. A huge responsibility. But at this point, do tell us, what's the people's perception? Have they received this piece of news well?
Well, it's just come in a couple of minutes ago. News just breaking here on India Today. Ranil Wickremesinghe has polled 134 votes as against Dullas Alaha Perunma, who's got 82, and Anura Kumara Disanaike has got just 3 in all. So Ranil Wickremesinghe has been elected as the 8th executive president of Sri Lanka. It's just happened right now in Parliament. It started right on time at 10 in the morning. Some votes, of course, are invalid, but some would argue that Ranil Wickremesinghe has actually fulfilled his lifelong ambition. He'd reached up to being, acting president of the country, but now till November 2024, he remains president of Sri Lanka, something that he really aspired to be. But his biggest challenge actually starts now. It's a multi-pronged challenge. One is to convince the streets of Sri Lanka that he will be able to deliver, because remember, the street was actually saying that you're just an extension of the Rajapakshas, and they wanted a clean change. As far as members of parliament that India Today spoke to, some of them, and they said as far as the constitution of the country is concerned, they will have to move within the constitutional framework till next elections are held in November 2024. So Ranil Wickremesinghe's biggest challenge is now to get food, fuel, and other essentials that this country needs, and then get the economy back on track. Easier said than done. He is seeking a number of deferred, loan deferment, and also an IMF bailout. Of course, just a couple of days back, he did say that the talks with the IMF are in advanced stages to get a bailout for Sri Lanka. If he's able to deliver that, if he's able to get assistance that the country is desperately seeking from India, then he does get a breather. Or, as the street has warned, the Janta Adagalya, the protesters, as they have warned, that they would be forced to take the streets once again. Whether that happens or not, we'll know in the next couple of hours, if not days.
Yet again, we're looking at the people of Sri Lanka who are really concerned if at all a leader will be able to pick the country out of crisis. Ranil Wickremesinghe largely was viewed as a loyalist of the Rajapaksas. They weren't very happy when he even took over as the interim prime minister or the interim president. But today he's won with 134 votes. Largely, will this go well with the people of Sri Lanka who are really desperate to see some normalcy in the nation, Gaurav?
That's $1 million question. You're absolutely right. The people, at least the protesters that we spoke to, they said that they wanted a clean break. They wanted a change. They wanted someone new. Yesterday, Sajith Premadasa, the leader of opposition who had stood aside in favor of Dullas Aluperema, he had also said that they had hoped that India will continue to assist whoever comes to power in Sri Lanka, whether it's Ranil Wickremesinghe or anyone else. So India's assistance remains extremely critical as far as Sri Lanka is concerned at this point of time, as does an IMF bailout that this country requires. There are a series of problems, and if you recall, a couple of days back, Ranil Wickremesinghe, he not only tried to distance himself from the policies of Gotabaya Rajpaksha, but he also tried to distance himself from the family, indicating that there are certain steps and measures that he wants to take now which hadn't been taken earlier. And some of these steps also include getting some assistance from India in terms of food, fuel, fertilizer, medicines, which is already on its way. And India has said that India will continue to assist the people of Sri Lanka. Also secure an IMF bailout. And Ranil Wickremesinghe said that talks with IMF are in an advanced stage. So should that IMF bailout come Sri Lanka's way, it would also lead to certain things that could trigger the street once again in terms of removing of subsidies, bringing up prices of food, fuel, electricity, and a lot of other things, reducing the size of the government here. Almost every second, third citizen is either in the army, the police, the government, or some other form of all of that will have to come down in the months and years ahead, and that would be a huge challenge, an uphill task for any government, given how angry people on the streets are at this point of time, Nabila.
If you could tell us, Gaurav, a quick word on what would be the first primary task for Ranil Wickremesinghe. We know that the country has been declared a state of emergency. It's now in a state of emergency. What do you think will be Ranil's first step to bring the country back to normalcy?
This India Today special broadcast comes to you from outside the Sri Lankan parliament, and this is where the next course of action technically is also being contemplated. Ranil Wickremesinghe, as the executive president of Sri Lanka, will have the task of securing an IMF bailout, bringing in money for this government to function, for this country to be able to function, bring in fuel from India, bringing in food from India, bringing in medicines from India, and that is just the first step. A major part of this country depends on tourism, so reviving tourism is one of his biggest challenges. Agriculture or agricultural produce. Now, one of the Tughlaki steps, if I may, taken by Gotabaya Rajpaksha was going 100% organic without weighing pros and cons and results. So getting fertilizers from India again is a challenge and a big task. Some of it has already happened. Ranil Wickremesinghe just a couple of days back again had said that we've managed to get fertilizers. They are being distributed to farmers. Loans of farmers with landholdings of less than 2 acres, those loans have also been cancelled. So reviving his country, getting his country back on its feet, it's a bankrupt country, it's a country in deep trouble. Reviving it is his biggest challenge Whether he's able to do it with angry protesters on the street, how will he contain those protesters right now?